What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be doing something that I've put off for a long time but really wanted to get done on my daily driver, which if you haven't seen any of the other videos, that's my 2015 Fiesta ST. It's actually sitting right here out in the driveway, which I'll show you in a second. But we're going to be installing some suspension. So that is the one thing this car I feel like has really been missing. You know, I've done the wheels, brakes, window tint, exhaust, full bolt-ons, but the one thing it was lacking was that it had gigantic wheel gap. Like, that was the only thing that made it not look like the car that it is and how it drives. So I was finally able to knock that out. This kind of just popped up out of nowhere. I was scrolling Facebook Marketplace and happened to see a suspension setup that somebody was selling. So shout out to the owner of 2J Racing. He was actually the guy selling the suspension. It was all complete. It had been on his car for about 20,000 miles. This is still a traditional strut and spring setup like what comes on the car, but just to explain what it is. So in the front, it is Bilsteins with Swift springs, and then in the rear, actually kind of unique. I can't really find any information about anybody else doing this, but it uses KYB shocks in the stock location, and then he actually had Hyperco springs like what you would buy for, like, say, a coilover kit or something of that sort. But they make springs of all kinds of different sizes and spring rates and things like that. So my guess is, I haven't asked him yet, but is that he figured out what diameter of spring these cars need in the rear, and then also a good desired spring rate to match what's in the front. So I kind of was just trusting what he had set up on the car. If you're familiar with his company at all, he makes a lot of aftermarket parts, exhaust, intakes, all that kind of stuff for a lot of Fiestas. He's really popular in the Fiesta world, but also he does a lot of stuff with GR Corollas and I think even some other platforms. So I was pretty confident that he knew what he was doing, and I can tell you after putting it on the car and driving it, one, it looks awesome, and two, it was hard to imagine that this car could handle any better than it already does out of the box. But the factory suspension was definitely shot after taking it apart. I don't know if I show that in the video or not, but they were definitely, the shocks and struts were worn. You know, they have 140,000 miles on it. So I was able to get a really good deal on this complete suspension setup with only 20,000 miles on it, like absurdly cheap. And so that was part of why I went with this over doing coilovers. You know, I'm spending a lot of money lately on other vehicles like the bike. I've actually got, oddly enough, coilover front suspension to do on this car as well, so that'll be an upcoming video. But yeah, anyways, let me show you the car. So. All right, well, here it is. Like I said, this is obviously in the future. I've already got the suspension installed. I did do just kind of a time lapse of it. The installation on these cars is very straightforward. You have 3 nuts on the top front strut, and then you have 2 large bolts at the bottom of the strut, and the rest is pretty simple. You have to disconnect the front sway bar. The rear couldn't be any easier. You literally disconnect the shock. It's 2 10mm bolts up top, and then you have the 1 bolt for the shock at the bottom, and you can pretty much pull the factory springs out by hand, no problem, as soon as you drop the suspension down. So I didn't want to bother spending too much time explaining that, but you know, here's the car. It obviously, you know, I'll have to get some pictures of it from before, but getting down kind of level with the car, you can see the rear, you know, is definitely tucked a lot more, but enough of a gap to where I can drive the car without scraping on anything and everything. The front, you know, pretty similar. It dropped at a decent amount. I think the Swift springs only call for like a 1.1 inch drop, and maybe that's what this is, but man, it looks like a lot more. I'm gonna guess that it just makes that big of a difference. So anywho, that's what the car looks like. I'll kind of do some more talking about how the car feels and everything like that. Take the car for a drive. I'm about to actually go get it cleaned up and go get some shots of the car in a more attractive looking area than this. But anyways, that's the car. Installation's pretty straightforward, and yeah, we'll jump into the car and see how it drives and talk about that a little bit. Well, we are out in the Fiesta with the suspension done now. This obviously isn't my first time driving the car. I kind of, like I said earlier, I got the suspension kind of like last minute, and then I was on a little bit of a time crunch to get it done. Otherwise, it was gonna have to wait until much later. So I I wasn't able to get kind of my initial reaction and whatnot, but I figured I would kind of talk about what the suspension is like, other than just how it looks. So, I mean, right off the bat, going into a turn, even at, slower speeds, the car is much more confidence inspiring. It feels significantly flatter, and there's a noticeable amount of increased grip. One thing in particular that I was really happy about, the only thing that this car did from the factory that I didn't really care for, and it's probably just due to the way the suspension in the rear is designed. It's a pretty simple design. I mean, it's literally just like a stamped steel beam, straight across beam with springs and shocks in the rear. And so it's pretty limited, I think, but, still really good out of the box. But it would, in certain scenarios, if you were pushing the car pretty hard and mid-turn, there was a weight transfer or you had to put more brakes into the car, it would almost get this like kind of unstable oversteer effect in the rear, which is really strange for a front wheel drive car. And I don't think I'm the only one that's had that, because there is a lot of people who obviously modify the rear suspension. And one thing I probably will do in the somewhat near future is either get one of the torsion style rear sway bars and or the brace that mounts inside of the beam to stiffen that rear beam to get the rear end to be a little more stable. But with that said, just swapping the suspension over was a night and day difference as far as making the rear end more stable, and the car just overall is a lot flatter. Yeah, so I don't know that I can tell a huge difference as far as the initial turn-in, but with lowering the car, not having it aligned yet, I'm going to assume that the toe is out of alignment, and so that can have a big effect on how the car feels as far as like initial turn-in. So I'm going to get it aligned at some point and we'll see, but I know that it's off a little bit because the steering wheel is slightly crooked, and there's really no, outside of that, these cars don't have really any camber adjustment or anything like that. So something I did do and is on the way is some camber bolts for the front that allow you to get up to like 1.5 degrees of camber in the front. And that's really beneficial for these cars as far as handling and turn-in. So I'm going to have those installed, or I'm going to install them, and then I'll get an alignment. But I want to keep it around that like 1.2 degrees of camber if I can kind of get it to that spot. I think that'll be good for spirited driving, and helping with the grip in the front without totally eating the front tires. I also rotate these tires every oil change pretty much, so as long as I don't mess with the rear. They do have camber plates for the rear, but I think I'm going to leave the rear at just no camber, so that way when I rotate the tires, I can at least maybe make them last a little longer with having the camber in the front. So once I get those installed, maybe I'll do like a little bit of a recap and see how the car drives after getting it properly aligned. But other than that, I mean, the car, one, it looks so much better, but two, it also just, the grip is significantly increased. It's really impressive how hard you can push this car in the turns. Now, I don't have as sticky tires on here as I've had in the past, so this car the suspension way outgrips the tires. So if I really wanted to push it, it would benefit from having some stickier tires. But for driving the car every day, it's much better. I mean, I can really get some speed through some of the turns. Unfortunately, I would have to drive pretty far to get into some like really good twisties, but there's kind of an area over here by the airport that has a lot of entrance and exit ramps that you can just kind of loop around. So when I first got the car, got the suspension done, I came out here just to kind of see, because I've come out here very often. So I'm kind of familiar with how the car feels pushing it around those turns, and it's a significant difference. I mean, I can push the car a lot harder or as hard, but with more confidence. It doesn't feel like the car's going to do anything weird on me as far as weight transfer or anything unexpected in the suspension that would, upset the car. So overall, I would say it's, I'm beating it to death. But massive difference, even for just being a traditional, you know, struts and springs. But only other thing I guess I could talk about is the ride. So it's definitely more firm. I'm not going to say it's harsh, because to me, it doesn't feel harsh, but it is significantly stiffer. Like when you just driving down the flat road, not hitting any bumps or anything, it really doesn't feel that much different than like the factory suspension. But when you hit some bumps, like especially any harsh stuff, it's definitely a little stiffer. So it doesn't beat the hell out of you. You could still easily daily the suspension and travel in it. I have no problems getting in and out of my driveway. I haven't really scraped on anything. It hasn't rubbed anywhere. So it's, you know, for sure something that you could live with, but it does make it a little stiffer. So if you're already kind of at the edge of your comfort level with the stock suspension, then this could possibly wear you out. But I think for most people that have these cars, kind of know what they're getting into and are looking to modify them. So I think this is a very livable suspension. I've been in vehicles that are much worse. So the rear springs, being that these, I don't really have anything to compare them to, because like I said, I can't find anybody that has had these rear springs like this, like, you know, custom, essentially Hyperco springs for the rear. I don't have any, you know, great comparison, but they seem like they're very matched very well to the front springs as far as handling and driving characteristics. They are really short, the primary springs, so they do have these little helper springs that you install at the top, and that's really just to keep the springs from coming completely unloaded. So I haven't noticed any crazy noise in the rear, because I was curious. I mean, I could easily get the springs in by hand with the suspension dropped and the shocks disconnected, but I do notice a little bit of noise with the springs in the rear, and it's only when one side is pretty much completely loaded and the other side is coming completely unloaded. So I think in extreme scenarios that they make a little bit of noise, but as far as driving down the road and like going through the twisties, there's nothing at all that I can hear. It's just in very unique, you know, pulling into the driveway where one side gets lifted up and the other's getting compressed really hard. But outside of that, really no complaints, because I was a little worried about that when I was going to put the springs in and seeing how easy they were to get in there. You know, I was worried about when it would unload, if they would essentially be able to move around in there, but they seem to be, you know, pretty good, with the exception of, like I said, those few random scenarios. So other than that, the car drives 10 times better, and it looks obviously so much better. The looks finally match the rest of the car as far as having the wheels and brakes and, you know, all that. It really made the car look so much better, in my opinion. So super happy with it, especially for the price. I know most people do coilovers, but like I said, I got these so cheap and my suspension was worn out. I wasn't really planning on doing this. It just kind of worked out that way. So for the amount I spent, I've already definitely got my money's worth. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the suspension, kind of, you know, maybe some pros and cons, even though there's not very many cons, but just thought I'd share kind of my thoughts. As far as I know, the Swift springs, especially in the front, are a very common option. So I thought it'd be good to kind of share my input on how the car drives, handles, rides, and things like that. So, well, anyways, I think that's going to wrap up this video, and we will see you guys in the next one.